The subject I've suggested is, what are we without race? So there was a blurb that went out. I'm going to actually start with facing the inherent idolatry of whiteness. So what I'm going to say is that part of dismantling racism is addressing the damage done to all of us by the concept of race. That whiteness has been, basically in all its forms, a mechanism for division and for theft. That it puts a group of humans at the center of the world, where for a religious person especially, God should be, but that for even an ethical person, no one group should be. And as Jellica clearly described last week, whiteness or lightness in nations and cultures that in the US are not considered white is not any better. Rabbi Heschel, the reading that Barry shared this summer has had a big impact on me, and this one quote especially. To act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart, to remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child. To act in the spirit of race is to sunder, to slash, to dismember the flesh of living humanity. Is this the way to honor a father, to torture his child? How can we hear the word race and feel no self-reproach? To me, the idolatry, the damaging nature of what is in the US and in many other places whiteness, does not actually belong to the people we describe as white. It is a means of consolidating power and wealth, and actually excludes and dominates many of the folks it purports to include. In some sense, no one is white. No group owns whiteness, even if we can pick out the folks currently in that position by their skin color in the US in 2020, more or less. In its essence, it is the power to control others and to benefit disproportionately from whatever the current economic system is. And while we call it whiteness now, it has nothing inherently to do with skin color or even with culture apart from colonizing or domination. Like caste, it assigns positions to groups of people in a hierarchical manner to benefit those at the top, and uses the mechanisms of nurture to create the illusion of natural superiority in those at the top. And so if we want to have a better future, we will need to imagine new ways of forming society. And here I think Bell Hooks is very helpful to us. She says about her kind of wrestling with how people could preach one thing and practice another, basically. I conclude that many of us are motivated to move against domination solely when we feel our self-interest directly threatened. Often then, the longing is not for collective transformation of society, an end to politics of dominations or politic of domination, but rather simply an end to what we feel is hurting us. This is why we desperately need an ethic of love to intervene in our self-centered longing for change. And now to make a little jump, I think we celebrate Blackness in part because it also may not actually belong solely to the people who in any particular place are identified as Black. What if Blackness is humanity's ability to create and resist and to some extent flourish even under the persistent pressure of exploitive systems? Part of dismantling racism is restoring honor where it has been historically denied, guarding the dignity and pride of all people, focusing extra attention on those whose race has designated them as less, who've been assigned a race, basically, assigned a lesser quality. Celebrating Blackness seems to me in this country, celebrating African Americans and celebrating other communities who have created life in a place of death, and celebrating cultures partly forged in the crucible of discrimination. And to me, as humanity, this may be our place of opportunity, that we can learn from the folks who in our system and society actually kept one another alive, rather than the folks who persist in risking other people's lives to save themselves. And maybe that's what we should keep our eye out for, and not simply skin color or nose shape or hair texture. At every moment in our history, I think we have had to use whatever was at hand to deal with the treachery of race. We've had to recover the ethnic identity and national identities lost to whiteness. We've had to shout about the inherent worth of folks identified as Black or other non-whites to highlight the humanity that the concept of race diminishes. So we must recognize the value of Black lives and bring justice and equality if we truly believe that all lives matter. We must be specific in our actions and approaches. We must address policing, prisons, education, healthcare, employment, wages, housing, et cetera, as well as cultural bias. But race is not culture. Race is not biological, it's not static. One's bone structure, facial features, hair texture, eye color, and skin color are biologically determined, they're genetic, but they are, as far as we can tell, endlessly changeable and can be combined and recombined in 1,000 different ways. We are, to be a little bit crude, more like dogs than horses. We create new breeds of ourselves over and over again. And maybe we need to hold our breed a little more loosely and not just trade one for another in domination. We can't ignore race. It's the historical, political, social reality we are facing among many other realities in this moment. But I'm asking if maybe we need to embrace not races, but the cultural forms that have shaped themselves in hope with the wretchedness of race. In religious language, the idolatry of race is putting any group in the place of God or gods and suggesting that any group of people has a natural right to determine the fate of others. And for me, that's a spiritual question, a question about the reality of the world. So are we all created equally in God's image? Are we all the same in some sense? Even as we wrestle with the amazing and I would say even nearly incomprehensible variety of human culture. And I keep going back to Rabbi Heschel saying, to act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart, to remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child. And to act in the spirit of race is to sunder, to slash, to dismember the flesh of living humanity. And is that a way to honor a father or a mother to torture their child? How can we hear the word race and feel no self-reproach? I would press farther perhaps than some people would in kind of following this line of questioning. Can any society that relies on persistent inequality of resources, that steals work from some of its members, or more often denies membership to, but steals the work of some to create its cultural life, either in part or whole, be free from examination? Interior group life and not just a way to describe strangers. You know, when we say, well, how, you know, we're by nature tribal, well, sometimes intertribal life is also not so great in terms of division. And I would ask, and I mean, this is a genuine question, what is ethnicity or nationality to us now? I do believe our historically grounded identities, the various groups we belong to, are immensely valuable. But I don't think anything in any of those group identities inherently will serve to repair what is broken unless we recognize the value in all groups and recognize the need for elasticity and the truth of constant change. Again, I think to combat racism, we used whatever came to hand. So the notion of people of color or non-whites has served really good purposes, but I'm not sure it makes a good ongoing approach to being human together. I don't believe white people should stay white, and I don't mean intermarriage. I mean, we should be dismantling race itself, that we need new language and new habits, that we need to dismantle caste and domination, and that we need to end poverty. And I think those things are really connected. If you've read some of the Willie James Jennings, I hope you were struck, as I was, by his suggestion that we need to reconnect to place, to the earth and land, and to our places. And I think we can learn from those who have held on to place and community, especially those who are low wealth. I think there's, that's a little bit of a jump, but I think there's a connection between what race has tended to do in its alliance with power and a sense of not, when you were in power, not seeing yourself as having a place. Like, again, seeing yourself as in the center or seeing yourself as transcendent in a way that no human group is. Back in the 1990s, a scholar I heard describe multiculturalism as saying there is no center. And I think we have gotten away from that pretty useful idea. I think now we're often competing to put ourselves in the center. And I think one of the lies of race is that there is a hierarchy of humanity and that it is discernible and that it must be enforced. And that's the lie we must repeatedly refuse if we want to not only dismantle racism, but create more egalitarian, free, loving, flourishing communities across the world. So no other group should attempt to put themselves in the place of whiteness, either for themselves or for everyone. That if we want our liberation to be complete, then everyone must be free, including our former enemies.